Douglas PUD's license to operate Wells Dam includes a requirement that every 10 years a study is completed that will estimate the survival of juvenile outmigrating fish as they pass through the Wells project. So we're out here at Wells Fish Hatchery today. It's about the middle of November in 2019, and we're doing one of the first parts of what will be the 2020 survival verification study. We're supposed to use one species as an indicator of all the species that would be out migrating as they leave the project area and travel down to the ocean. In this case, the species has been selected are yearling summer Chinook. So last year we collected broodstock here at the Wells hatchery facility. Those broodstock were crossed. We took eggs from females and milk from males. They went into the incubation room and they incubated there and hatched out and moved, through the process basically. And then the hatchery staff moved the fish back out here into the raceways, and right now I would say they're approximately 60 to 70 millimeter fork length. They might actually be a little bit smaller here. Today BioMark is here and we're pit tagging 110,000 fish. Of those 110,000 fish, 100,000 will be released in the spring of 2020. The releases will begin in the middle of April and they'll continue till the middle of May, so it's about a 30-day study. So what you're seeing behind me is a pescalator, and fish that are untagged are coming out of the raceway. They're going up that corkscrew pescalator, and it's a water-to-water transfer all the way up the pescalator into a PVC pipe. They travel down that PVC pipe and they go into the tagging trailer to be tagged. The fish will come into the tagging trailer. They'll be subjected to a dose of MS-222, which is a drug that basically puts the fish to sleep, makes them lose equilibrium. Then what BioMark will use, they'll use a preloaded needle, and the needle attaches to a yellow gun. And in each one of those needles, there's been a pit tag placed in there. The BioMark staff will pick up a fish that has been anesthetized. They'll make a very small incision using the tip of that needle, and they use the gun then to just push that tag out of the needle into the fish. And then really it'll only take a day or two for the fish to basically recover from that tagging process. And then what happens is that pit tag gives a specific ID to that fish. So when we release it in the wild and it's swimming downriver and goes past dams that have pit tag interrogation systems or antennae, we'll basically be able to know exactly where that fish came from, when it was tagged, what group it was part of. So each one of these fish will go into a specific tank, and we'll be able to know which tags and which fish went into a specific tank. We'll know if they were released above Wells Dam versus a fish that was released below Wells Dam as, say, a control, and then do some math to basically determine what the survival rate is of these fish as they travel down past Wells Dam. So we're out here in late April of 2020. We're at Ives Landing boat launch. This is just outside the mouth of the Medhow. This is one of 3 release locations. Other release locations include the mouth of the Okanagan, and the control group is released in the tail race of Wells Dam. So in the hatchery, fish that were tagged back in November were loaded using a fish pump from the raceway into the transport tanks.
Hi, I'm Ryan Richmond with BioMark, and I'm overseeing the fish loading process for the 2020 Survival Verification Study. So the process starts in a raceway. We will crowd the fish up to a pump intake. Then the pump is turned on. The pump operator will control the speed of the pump, which controls the feed rate of the fish through the system. And we will draw fish up through the pump to a dewatering tower. We have a person on the dewatering tower. They can visually monitor the fish coming over. And then from there, they go down a pipe through a singulator, which will help separate the fish as they go through 4 pit tag detectors that are spaced out on a pipe approximately 10 feet apart. And from there, they go into a fish release tank. The process takes about 15 minutes to load a tank, and each release tank has approximately 550 pit tagged fish in it.
The transport tanks are hooked up and connected to water in the hatchery. That water is river water, and they'll be acclimated in those tanks for several hours to 1 day. The tanks are then loaded using a forklift onto a flatbed truck. We do that very, very carefully. We're also making sure we standardize that loading time, that forklift time, and also the transport time once the fish leave the hatchery and are transported up to the release location. Because the Brewster release location is the furthest point away from the hatchery, we use that travel time to standardize the other travel times to Pateros and below wells. The truck may drive further and turn around in order to standardize that travel time. In addition, the transport time on barge from the Brewster treatment plant to the mouth of the Okanagan is the longest barge tow. We use this time to standardize both the mouth of the Medhow and the Wells tail race barge time. Using this method, we can ensure that the fish are subjected to the exact same transport and travel conditions. So when the fish are loaded onto the barge, the first tank that goes on the barge has 10 extra fish. Those fish are removed and we use those fish for physiological sampling. We're looking at blood and muscle chemistry, mostly cortisol and glucose, also relative fat content, and the length and the weight of the fish. And the hope is that throughout the study, we'll have consistent physiological statistics for the fish that we release above the dam and the fish we release below the dam. When the tanks are loaded onto the barge, they're hooked up to a manifold system and a trash pump that distributes river water to the tanks. Biomark will take oxygen readings as soon as the fish are loaded onto the barge. Biomark is a contractor that is monitoring not only water temperatures but dissolved oxygen in the tank, so we make sure the fish have plenty of oxygen, and that's to make sure that the fish are in really good shape right before release. Once loaded at the mouth of the Medhow, the barge will actually do circles for 35 minutes immediately prior to release in order to standardize that on-barge time. The fish are being acclimated to river conditions by pumping river water from the river into the tanks. In several minutes from now, we will open the cam lock fitting and release the fish into the river. Immediately prior to release, Biomark will take one final dissolved oxygen reading before turning off the pump that's distributing water to the fish. The cam lock fitting will be opened up and the fish will be released into the river. The time at release is recorded on every tank released to make sure we are standardizing release times. The release schedule is designed to allow mixing of two treatment groups and the control group. So on the first day, we release fish at the mouth of the Okanagan around 2 p.m. in the afternoon. On the following day, we release fish at the mouth of the Medhow at 10 a.m. On the same day, we release fish in the Wells tail race at about 2 p.m. Using this release schedule allows the fish to line up not only in the Wells tail race, but arrive at the first detection point, in this case Rocky Reach juvenile bypass detector, at the same time. The hope is that as fish travel down through the river, they experience similar river conditions. The wind has been really difficult, especially in the tail race. That was one major challenge. High flows in the tail race make it very challenging too to actually position the barge safely, or just logistically just getting it to the spot where you want to release the fish is very challenging when you have high flows or spill volumes coming out of Wells Dam. This afternoon we're in the Wells Dam tail race. This is by far the most challenging location to load the fish out of the three locations. Because the reach is so far, we have to use a larger crane, and that crane can only operate when wind speeds are approximately 20 miles per hour or less. Similarly, we have different river conditions at Wells Dam, so when spill volumes go up, it can complicate the loading. There's a wind sensor at the top of the crane that basically gives the operator in the crane an idea of what the wind velocities are up there, and when the wind velocities go over 20 miles per hour, it prevents us from actually doing the loading, so we have to watch the wind speeds to make sure we're loading these tanks and maintaining safe conditions for the operators and the staff that are receiving the tanks down on the barge. Other challenges included the reliance on various types of equipment needed for the study in order to assure the standardization of all release times and locations, and the equal treatment of both control and treatment fish. The completion of the 2020 survival verification study included the successful planning, rearing, tagging, transporting, and releasing of approximately 105,000 yearling summer Chinook salmon. This included releasing 17,600 at the mouth of the Okanagan River, 35,200 at the mouth of the Methow River, and 52,800 into the Wells Tail Race. Fish were being detected at lower river dams, including Rocky Reach, McNary, John Day, and Bonneville Dam, just days after the first release was completed. Both treatment and control fish within replicates were showing up at Rocky Reach Dam at similar times, which was an important objective of the study. Final study results will fulfill Douglas PUD's survival verification requirement for spring migrating planned species.